Welcome to this extract of the online session Growing the Pie, Wealth, Ownership and the Law, an online event hosted by esela, the legal network for social impact.
Thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you to esela for putting together this session. I'm Sarah Ellington. I'm a disputes and crisis management lawyer at DLA Piper, with a focus on both avoiding and managing sustainability and ESG related crises. Throughout the past couple of months and years, we've seen a growing importance of sustainability and ESG. And in particular, as we look to the recovery in COVID-19 and ways to build back better. Much of the focus of that to date has been on environmental and social aspects, but I think they're intimately connected with governance. And we've got a real expert on governance and how this fits into the sustainability and ESG picture with us today. Alex Edmans, Professor of Finance at the London Business School and author of How to Grow the Pie, How Great Companies Deliver Both Profit and Purpose. And he's come to join us to discuss his theory of pie economics. I'm sure he'll correct me if I've pronounced that slightly wrongly, and how that can be put into practice. So over to you, Alex.
Oh, great. Thanks, Sarah. Thank you so much to esela for the invitation. It's great to be here. And thanks to everybody for joining. So as Sarah said, my name is Alex Edmans. I'm a professor at London Business School. And one of my main focuses is on responsible business. So how businesses can serve wider society in addition to shareholders. And my focus on this as an academic is to make sure that whatever suggestions we have are based on rigorous large-scale research rather than just, say, shooting from the hip. And so it's great to be able to have a chance to speak to this audience. I look forward to your questions and comments.
Great. Well, we're slightly restricted for time in terms of how much we can cover today. So hopefully everyone will find this interesting introduction. But I do commend to you to read Alex's book to get a fuller picture of what's going on. We're going to try and deal with three broad topics today. What is pie economics and how does it fit into the law? Secondly, how you understand your purpose and the concept of excellence. And thirdly, the role of shareholders. Now, some people have submitted questions in advance, and we're going to deal with those, a couple of those as we go through. If you do have questions, unfortunately, because we're quite short on time, I can't guarantee we're going to be able to get through all of them, but you can submit them in the chat function. And Alex has very kindly agreed to answer any questions that do get put forward that we don't have time to deal with in the session afterwards as well. So you've got a great opportunity here.
Yeah, so that's absolutely right. So if we don't get to the questions, it'd be great if you just drop me a LinkedIn message and I'll reply to that. So if it's in the chat, I'll see the question, but I won't know how best to reply to you. So if you drop me a LinkedIn note, I'll be really happy to get back to you. So thanks.
Great, thanks, Alex. So I think the thing to do is to kick off for the uninitiated as to what pie economics is, and a short introduction to it, if you would.
Absolutely, Sarah. So what is pie economics? So it's the idea that the value that a company creates, it can be given by a pie. And notice that pie is not just financial wealth, it is social value. So it includes not just profits, but also human capital, natural capital, and the like. And so often, CEOs believe that their responsibility is to maximize profits for shareholders. And they also view the pie as fixed. So if the pie is fixed, the only way to increase investors' slice of the pie is by reducing the slices given to everybody else. So that could be paying workers as little as possible, price gouging customers, perhaps getting away with as little tax as legally possible, and so forth. But the whole idea of growing the pie is that there's a separate way of maximizing value, and that is through creating value for stakeholders. For example, training workers, treating them as humans, as colleagues, giving them meaningful work, a safe working environment. Now, often managers think that's at the expense of profits, But the whole idea of pie economics is that you're not just giving them part of the pie, you're growing the pie, they're becoming more productive and more efficient. So ultimately, shareholders do benefit in the long term. And you might think, well, this idea that both society and shareholders can benefit seems to be too good to be true. It seems like a pipe dream, but instead the idea is that it's backed up by a lot of rigorous evidence suggesting that companies that deliver value to stakeholders ultimately also benefit shareholders. So the trade-off that we often see, and which is indeed there in the short term, may well not be there in the long term.
Yeah, and I think that that's an interesting question, isn't it, for this particular audience as well, which is mainly made up of people who work with impact investors. And so perhaps a lot of these people are on a slightly different side to the traditional thoughts we might have had in terms of weighing up the difference between the profit on one side and purpose on the other. And whereas a lot of companies might have traditionally been weighted very much to profit and thought that purpose needed to take a back seat for that, in many impact investment companies, actually purpose has come first and profit is almost a secondary thing. But certainly the way that you explain it, the two things don't have to be mutually exclusive.
Yeah, and I think that that's really important because often, if we do think they're mutually exclusive, then often a CEO might think, well, I need to say some stuff about purpose in order to be good PR. So I might sign a business roundtable statement and so forth, but I won't genuinely put it into practice because if I do, it's going to be costly to my shareholders. But what the research is suggesting is actually genuine implementation of purpose is something which is commercially important. And so this is why I often use the word purpose. I don't often use the word corporate social responsibility because CSR has the connotation of being a non-core action that the CEO can delegate to another division. But the whole idea of purposeful business is it's fundamental to how a company goes about its business, its reason for being. It should be a CEO level issue. Is the way that I'm making profit a way which is a byproduct of creating value for society?
Yeah, thank you. Now, I'm also conscious that quite a number of the audience here are lawyers. And we always like to know what our own place in terms of these types of things is. So obviously, pie economics is a business and an economic idea. But part of the idea of this session is to understand how it fits in with the kind of legal systems and the things that we do within our companies and the things that we advise on in a broader context. And Ruth, you had a specific question about this.
Yeah. So first of all, Alex, Sarah, thank you for putting on this wonderful webinar. And as a lawyer in this context, I do want to understand your view, Alex, as a professor of finance, how legal systems so far have enabled or restricted this concept of growing the pie. And jumping off of that, what are the roles that lawyers can play to further your vision of growing the pie?
Thanks, Ruth. And I think this is a really interesting question because actually when Alex and I were first preparing for this session and discussing things, I said to him what I thought you might think was quite controversial, that actually I didn't see that there was a big difference between my reading of the UK Corporate Governance Code and what companies and directors are being expected to do by regulation and by general corporate ethics, and what is now being espoused in pie economics. And Alex, I think that actually it wasn't such a controversial idea at all.
Yeah, so thanks very much, Ruth. This is a really important question. And so this gets to one of the big challenges that companies say that they face. So the traditional perspective is current law, at least in the UK and the US, seems to be about shareholder primacy. And then people are concerned, well, is that going to lead to companies focusing on shareholders at the expense of wider society? Do we need to change the law in order to make companies more purposeful? And I think this is a little bit misunderstood, because shareholder primacy is sometimes believed to be short-term shareholder value, but there's nothing about shareholder primacy which is inherently short-term. Indeed, the concept of shareholder value is inherently forward-looking. So shareholder value is the value of all future profits and dividends of a company until the end of time, which is why some of the most valuable companies today don't actually make many profits today, but just have great long-term prospects. So the whole highlight of the book is to highlight that actually shareholder value, at least long-term shareholder value, and stakeholder value are aligned in the long term. And so that suggests that we need not actually change the system away from shareholder value to something different. Instead, it's to encourage them to take a long-term approach to shareholder value. So that might be many things. That might be to push for, say, quarterly earnings reporting not to be mandatory. It might be to help long-term contracts be upheld. So what is the optimal way to pay CEOs? I believe it's in terms of the long-term stock price in 5 to 7 years' time. If there are indeed potential for things such as clawbacks for poor performance, for things that backfire, that might be something that lawyers can help out with. But I think rather than the shareholders versus stakeholders debate, I think where law really comes in is on the long term, the short term, just to ensure that long term contracts get upheld. I also think it's important to recognise that actually many things that we're thinking about can't fully be legislated. So I fully believe that lawyers have a massive role to play in this. However, what the law is really good at is compliance. And I think some of the things we want from companies is true commitment. For example, we can ensure there's minimum wages. We can ensure there's a standard of health and safety. Can we legislate something such as giving meaningful work to employees and giving junior employees the chance to step up? We can't. So that's something where my approach is much more to tell executives it's in your own interest to develop your workers rather than just a compliance exercise. So that's not to say we shouldn't think about compliance and law, and I think there's a lot of role for that. But I think companies should think about this as being not just complying by the law, but going beyond this. And so I think the combination of the legal aspect, but also the business case and knowing that this should be something voluntary, I think is what's going to change things.
Yeah, and I think what we've seen actually in terms of the newer wave of regulation, for example, is that it's been more purposive in terms of asking companies to try and achieve specific things. And Alex, I would guess that fits in quite well with your theories in terms of companies being able to set their overall tone and value. And then using that to understand how they're going to comply with things like regulation.
Yeah, so I think that's important, is that a purpose of a company is going to differ a lot from company to company. So a purpose is why a company exists, the role that it plays in society, how it aims to contribute to the common good. And that's going to be different from company to company. And one of the concerns with law is that it will be one size fits all. It's very difficult to tailor the law to specific companies. So it may well be that for some companies, reducing their carbon emissions is really important. But maybe for another company, the best way in which it serves wider society is through promoting financial inclusion and the like. And so if it was purely a legal exercise and a compliance exercise, then people might do what's the minimum is required to comply with the law, even though in their particular circumstance, it might be there's different ways in which that company goes and contributes towards wider society.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Ruth, do you think that answers, in general, your question?
Yeah, I think so too. I think Alex has also alluded to the role that lawyers and regulations will play in meeting businesses where they are. So I think we have at least a good beginning for moving forward.
Yeah, and I think it sounds like, as lawyers, we need to kind of step out the comfort zone of saying something very prescriptive, and step more into the kind of facilitation role of understanding where we fit within the ecosystem of the company, and kind of fulfilling our own purpose in helping the company meet its own purpose and values as well.
Yes, and also within the broad remit of purpose. So I'm not a lawyer. I don't have legal expertise, but one of the dimensions of purpose, where I have interacted with lawyers quite a bit, is on employee culture, so corporate culture, and so to the extent to which lawyers can help ensure that a workplace is a safe place to work, that that there's high psychological safety, that if there are concerns of say harassment and bullying and so on, those are topics that employees are able to bring to the attention of the company without repercussions. So anything that can be done in order to ensure that people can flourish at work, I think that's a way in which, certainly in my interactions with lawyers, it has been a major role in encouraging more healthy corporate cultures.
Yeah, and I think also as when you read the book, Alex, it very much comes across that this is something that's really for every company, and not just for specific ones. But I know that in the last kind of 6 months or so, we've also had sessions with esela looking at, for example, different ways in which companies can be set up to have kind of profit as a primary purpose.
Thank you to Sarah Ellington and Alex Edmans for this session. Subscribe to find out about future events hosted by esela, the Legal Network for Social Impact, and click on the link below to find out about membership.